Okay, now let's go to Pete McGarvey.
And a special welcome on this occasion to Robert Payne, a colleague, a working buddy of mine, and someone I'd like you to meet as part of this series, which features morning people of the metro area, those who make your day on radio. And all this, of course, to observe my 40th anniversary in the business. Robert, welcome.
Thank you very much, Pete, and happy 40th anniversary, I guess I should say.
Thank you very much. Well, I think most people know you on the air as the fellow with the sense of ironic fun, if I can put a label to it. You seem to have tongue-in-cheek with a lot of the things you say and do on the air, with whoever your partner might be. Very effective. Now, there's also a warmth to it. There's also an affection for your surroundings and your public, and we're going to talk about that as we get along. First of all, I want to take a look at your career in general. When did it begin, where, and why radio?
My career began in Quebec City, which is where I grew up, Pete. As strange as it seems to some people who tend to ask me things like, what island are you from? I tell them I'm from the island of Montreal, and that's where I was born back a few years ago. And about the time you were getting in radio, actually. And so I grew up in Quebec City and went to university there and came to the end of my first year of university, and I was looking for something to do in terms of summer employment. And because I happen to know a couple of people who worked in the radio station in Quebec City, the English language radio station in Quebec City, they said, you know, we need somebody, and are you interested? And up until that time, I don't think I'd been particularly geared towards working in radio. It was something that I listened to. But anyway, to make a long story short, I got the job, and the rest is history, as they say.
What was this job? What did you do? DJ?
Well, as you know, I'm sure, when you work in a small radio station of that size, and I'm talking about a 250-watt radio station, which basically got around the corner, you do everything, and that included being a disc jockey. It included reading news, and actually, the reason I left there, and that was maybe about a year and a half after I first got there, and I did not leave of my own volition, Pete, and they sort of suggested that I go, and...
We're hearing a lot of that on this series, by the way.
Yeah.
It seems to be part of the tradition of radio.
The suggestion was made after I had refused to help paint the library, which was also considered to be part of our duties there. And I thought I was a radio star and was not the kind of person that should be asked to paint the library. I mean, what is this, a real job?
Yeah. If you had to do it again, would you do it?
The paint the library? No. I think probably after all these years, I still would probably do the same thing, because being fired from that place forced me to look for a better job, which I found.
In radio?
Yeah, in radio. In radio.
Right.
And,
had you an idea of what you wanted your niche to be then?
No, I didn't. I think radio back then was much different than it is today, and I think that there was a tendency to feel, if you were in radio, that stardom was going to occur
automatically.
Yeah, within the next 2 days anyway,
right,
and in spite of the fact that you were earning $40 a week. So therefore, I had this great optimism, and yeah, I would have done it again, I guess, the same way.
Okay, from Quebec City, you went where?
From Quebec City, I went to Dominion stores.
On your way to the next job?
We'll see. I left out some details for fear of boring you, but while I was working in this radio station, I was also working on a part-time basis for Dominion stores in Quebec City, and
very broadening experience.
Yes, yes, it was. It taught me to put things in little boxes, which comes in very handy when you're a news person. And anyway, I got to the end of my employment in Quebec City, and at least with the radio station, so Dominion stores seemed to like me better than the radio station people did, and suggested that I take this management training course in Montreal, which I did, and found that really after taking this management training course, found that I didn't really want to work for Dominion stores that badly, and I got a job in Montreal at a radio station.
You did get into Ontario eventually.
Yes, I did. That was 1964, and 1964 being, I guess, a couple of years after I got into the business, and I started in Ottawa at a brand new radio station, which was going on the air at that time, and owned by a fellow by the name of Jeff Sterling. I don't know if you know him or not.
Jeff
but,
Sterling, the Newfoundland Wonder.
That's right,
Right.
The Newfoundland Wonder, and good friend of Don Jameson's and that kind of thing. The only man in radio who has ever given me more money than I asked for.
In those days, Jeff Sterling was considered very with it, if I recall. He enjoyed the culture of that time, the counterculture of that time.
Well, he was a millionaire who was, I guess, different to say the least. Not only had he made a lot of money, but I guess in latter years went to India and climbed mountains and hung out with gurus and those kinds of things.
Fascinating people in radio, as you were beginning to find. So this is 1964. Was it a news job in Ottawa?
Yeah, it was a news job. Excuse me. There was some music to it. I did occasional all-night music programs, but that is when I got into news on a full-time basis, and it's been news since that time.
Now you've been in, I know, in London and several stations in Toronto before you found your way to CKEY.
See, you forced me to tell these bad stories about myself. The first job in Ottawa went extremely well, to the point where another radio station in Ottawa offered me a job to come over there for more money, and being the crass individual that I am, I accepted their offer, and after about 7 months of that particular job, they decided that I also was not the material of which great broadcasters was cut. So they cut me from their employment role, and I then went to Niagara Falls, Ontario, for a couple of years, and the people in Niagara Falls also, after a couple of years, decided that perhaps I should try some other radio station. So there was another radio station going on the air in London, as luck would have it, and I ended up working in London and for another couple of years, and of course not getting any loans at the bank during these days, because I wasn't staying anywhere any more than 8 or 10 months or so. But anyway, I eventually got a job offer from Toronto.
And Toronto turned out to be much better than 2 years.
Well, actually, yes and no. I first worked at Chum. Chum is the organization that offered me a job here in Toronto, and they kept me for 6 months, and then decided that I don't know why I'm laughing about this, but I guess to somebody who doesn't know broadcasting, or broadcasting as it was back in those days, would probably think that I was doing something really wrong, when in fact I think a lot of people who were working back in those days tended to move around a lot.
Oh yes, you expected the musical chairs thing. That brings us to CKEY, and that was a long time ago, seemingly, about 1971, 70?
Late 60s, actually. I started on a part-time basis at CKEY, and I started working on a full-time basis 1973 or so, about the time you were getting there, or just before you got there.
When I got there, Bob Payne, Robert Payne, was the person everybody was talking about, and still are. I thought one critic put it down exactly right, that Robert Payne had probably the best radio news voice in Toronto, and I think it still applies. Well,
thank you very much, Pete. What can I do but agree, huh?
This is the important thing. That it didn't end there. You had this long association in the morning show with Keith Rich, and it's interesting how all that began and evolved, and why it worked. What's your idea of that?
Well, actually, there was a gentleman by the name of Taylor Parnaby, whom we both know, who was the news director of CKEY at the time, and one morning he came in and suggested that rather than go in and do a formalized, rather sedate kind of newscast, which I guess had been CKEY style up to that time, to go in and just have a conversation with the disc jockey, and the disc jockey happened to be Keith Rich, and it happened that our senses of humor, I guess, were basically on the same plane, and after a couple of days, we started chuckling at occasional stories and making commentaries and that kind of thing, and that grew into something which I guess I could not have envisioned, nor could the station have, and I'm sure that at various times the station was a little nervous about the fact that that so-called serious news was being handled in a whimsical and lighthearted fashion.
There were occasions when it was hard to know if you knew where you were going to come out on the story. Did you know at what point you were going to come out?
No.
That's the short answer.
Had absolutely no idea, except that we know that the broadcast has to be a certain time. You know, you have to be off the air at whatever it is, 22 minutes to the hour, so we knew that it was going to come off at that time, but other than that, no.
Robert, that's one of our problems on this broadcast as well, and I want to get to one or two of the memorable things that happened on that series that people remember, and you remember, as being especially hilarious. Pick a story.
Pick a story. Well, it's kind of hard to relate or to perhaps articulate as well as I could or as I should, but those stories that we would sometimes find funny would be the kinds of stories that other people might find morbid. Like I remember one particular one that involved a witch doctor in, I believe, in some part of Africa, whose act was to get on stage every night. He had a theatrical kind of presentation, and his act was to place a blanket over the subject and to then plunge a dagger, I guess, into the blanket, and the subject would emerge alive. on this particular case, it did not seem to work out that way, and it's not so much that we are laughing at anybody's misfortune as it is the fact that sometimes people do foolish things, and so if you get, I suppose it's like giggling in church, you know, that Mary Tyler Moore episode where she is attending Chuckles the Clown's funeral.
Right.
Once you get into that situation in radio, it can be rather disastrous, I guess.
But also memorable for listeners, and
I hope so, Pete. I hope so.
Well, this goes on now. Your new partner is Jay Nelson, our morning man, and different kind of chemistry, but it's happening. We're hearing some very funny things morning by morning.
I sort of associate it with the way one might feel if one were, I suppose, to begin living with a new spouse after years of living with another spouse. I mean, there are adjustments to make, and Jay and I and the rest of the morning crew seem to have been making those adjustments quite well. And but as you say, it is different. It is different, but still enjoyable. And of course, I miss Keith too.
Robert Payne, our very special guest on this edition of the program, in this series in which we're inviting you to meet the morning stars of Toronto, those people who make your day. That's all for this week. I'm Pete McGarvey. Next week, we'll meet another of the radio personalities of Toronto.